Oh, shit, the way I could change this background. They don't give you the background no more. I guess I don't get my background changed no more. Damn. Anyhow, no, 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 no. What up, YouTube? This is one and only Kashmere Majesty, Ray Ron Hood, Damian Moody, whatever you want to call me. Now I'm back again with another live video. Now, please excuse me, y'all. Y'all already know that I don't like reading too long. And like I said, in majority of these books, these chapters be long. But I'll try my best to get through them, especially when it's small print. So I might be adding words, mispronouncing words, shit like that. Y'all gotta forgive me. Like I said, y'all could get the book yourselves. Especially when it's these books with no pictures, like the Trayvon Martin book ain't got no pictures. The Ja Rule book ain't got no pictures. Well, I only got through one chapter in the Ja Rule book. I just started reading that. I should have been read that. It's like some of these books got pictures and some of them don't. So it is what it is. I don't show the pictures any damn way. I just like looking at them. I just read the book. So this is the Rest in Power: The Enduring Life of Trayvon Martin. I'm on part 13. Continue. I'm trying to see. I'm trying to remember where I left off. I'm just saying. So then, what you decide to take on O'Mara X is what's called a challenge interview, correct? At this point, I wasn't ready for one, but yes, you are also under quite a deal of pressure to get this case moved forward, correct? Sereno answered yes and had to move even quicker than you would have otherwise have moved on this case because of some of the eternal pressures that we now know. It's in this case, O'Mara. I'm gonna ask O'Mara. Yes, sir. And it was for that reason you may have moved a little bit quicker than you otherwise would have liked to interview Mr. Zeman in this sort of aggressive context, correct? Sereno said yes. As a result, he had little to challenge Zimmerman with and described this third interview as mild. Sereno also noted that this case was particularly difficult because it was possible, at least from the detective's perspective, that in this particular case, he would have been considered a victim also. O'Mara then asked Sereno about the defendant's profile of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon and his reasons for questioning him about his intentions and thought process. Yusuf hit him with that pretty straight out of the box right, hoping for maybe a response that would give you an insight as to whether or not he was profiling Trayvon because Trayvon was black, O'Mara said. So you asked him if he would have been white, would you have reacted the same way? Sereno answered, yes, sir. We all knew that if Trayvon would have been white, the killer probably wouldn't have reacted in such a manner. Sereno said it didn't matter, and to him, he seemed straightforward in his response. There are external concerns about that, and I need to get that clarified, Sereno said. You also had a certain that you evidence to him or challenge him on because you had an issue as to whether or not his redemption of getting hit dozens of times were supported by the forensic evidence, correct? In my view, yes, they were lacking. The killer had told investigators he had been hit nearly 30 times, but Sereno felt the injuries he sustained were not severe enough for that much pounding. The detective added that people often panic during an altercation and exaggerate the facts. So while this concerned him, he didn't feel it indicated an outright lie. In my book, when you exaggerate the facts, that is a lie. There is no way Trayvon hit him 30 times. O'Mara asked Reno again about his bluff that Trayvon may have filmed the incident on his phone, to which the killer responded that he hoped someone had. Sereno again said this meant to him that either he was telling the truth or was a complete pathological liar. He knew that Trayvon wasn't filming anything because he was trying to get away from his killer. So if we were to take pathological liar off the table as a possibility, just for the purposes of the next question, do you think he was telling the truth? O'Mara asked. Yes, Sereno replied. But he given me the impression that he hadn't believed the killer's story. With that, the court then recessed for the evening. O'Mara played Sereno like a piano, and Sereno, who had seemed to, so spectacle, skeptical of the killer when we first talked, who also recommended in his report that the killer be charged, seemed to be walking all that back. Once again, we felt the law enforcement, whose testimony is almost always helpful to the prosecution, was working against us. Why? When we returned the next day and before the jury answered, De La Rianda led off with an objection. He argued that the end of Sereno's testimony from the previous day should be stricken from the record because he was giving his opinion, which, coming from the police officer, might bias the jury. After briefly reading over some of the case law, Judge Nelson agreed that Sereno's opinion should be stricken. The jury was then brought in and given an instruction, as if that alone would cause them to forget everything flying in Sereno's testimony the day before. Why hadn't the objection been made before Sereno finished giving his testimony, before the jury had a night to sleep on it? It wasn't much of a victory for the prosecution. O'Mara trust forward playing a portion of the recording of Sereno's third interview with Zimmerman, in which he played for the defendant the 911 tapes and asked the client if he recognized the voice script file. In the transcript, O'Mara said there was a suggestion yesterday that Mr. Zimmerman said it doesn't even sound like me. Do you remember that? Sereno said yes. Did that change the direction of your interrogation of him at all? It didn't, he said. When asked if the killer's comment about the voice on 911 tape, that doesn't even sound like me, caused any concern, he said no, it did not. On his redirect, De La Rianda thankfully had more questions for Sereno. It just seemed like they just asking the same shit over and over. And how many chapters I gotta read? How many pages I gotta read? Because this is a long ass chapter for no reason at all. Golly. I'm sorry, y'all. It just seemed like it's a lot to read. And I'm trying to get done with this book because we almost done. We only got the rest of this chapter and then one chapter left. But I'm sorry. I feel like just a lot of this shit we already know how it's all going to end. But just reading it and just reading how everything went, in the words of both parents, you get mad. And that's probably why I'm getting agitated reading these long chapters. Because it's like, damn, that's fucked up. He replayed the killer's words from the non-emergency line call that became the first words of this trial. These assholes, they always get away. And is that something you would use in reference to somebody you're going to invite over for dinner? Dion Rihanna asked, "Would you call them these assholes? No, sir, I would not." He said. Dion Rihanna played more of the non-emergency call, and in the word, part of my language, fucking punk, something that you would refer to something good about people when you were referring to them. No, sir, it's not. Does that statement not indicate ill will, hatred, and spite against somebody else, sir? Calling somebody and referencing them as fucking punks. That is ill will and spite, correct? Sereno said. De La Ronda was finally trying to link the killer's words to the kind of mindset, deranged mind that was the legal definition that could lead to an conviction. Did the defendant ever indicate that he was happy that there were burglaries being committed in Twin Lanes? No, he did not. In fact, did he actually say this? And then De La Ronda played another portion of the killer's interview with Officer Doris Singleton, in which the killer references his wife becoming scared after the burglaries that took place in the neighborhood and said that was the reason for starting the neighborhood watch program. In describing his role as a neighborhood watch coordinator, the killer said he often calls the non-emergency line when he sees something suspicious, but these guys always get away. Didn't he say that to the non-emergency operator also, but he used more colorful language. Per my language, these assholes always get away, correct? The detective agreed that he had. If somebody were to believe that another person is a criminal, could that be a form of profiling? Around to continue, it could be cons- construed uh, or construed as such. Sereno said after O'Mara objected. Was there any indication that Trayvon Benjamin Martin, the young man just turned 17, was committing a crime that evening, sir? Of course, he said there wasn't. Young Aranda's pace was now quickening, and we were glad for that. He moved on to the killer's claim that he left his truck and followed Trayvon down a path between the townhomes where he needed an address to give to the police that couldn't remember the name of the street he was on. Right there on that corner, Dylan Ronda said, pausing the video, walked through on the frame with the townhouse facing the spot where the killer said he parked. Live Miss Law. I want to show you a photograph in front of Miss Law's residence, he said. Isn't there a numerical address right there in front of her house? there was, and De La Ronda zoomed in on the frame to show the numbers 1211, which Sereno confirmed as the correct address. The defendant in that reenactment, when he's pointing at all the back of all of these houses where he's claiming he doesn't have an address, De La Ronda said his arms now outstretched in the air, but there's an address right there staring at him. Isn't that true, sir? Yes, there is, Sereno said. De La Ronda then showed an aerial photograph at Twin Lakes. His highlighted he highlighted a portion of Zimmerman's interview in which the killer stated he couldn't remember the name of the street he was on when he left his truck. But in the photograph, De La Ronda pointed out that there are only three streets in the retreat. In the street the killer was on, Twin Tree Lane, was the same street he led to the main entrance of the neighborhood. With only three streets in the complex, how could you not know what street you were on? Which meant the killer knew where he was, knew the terrain. It was clear that he exited his truck for one reason, to follow Trayvon and make sure he did not get away. Finally, De La Ronda pointed out one more major hole in the killer story. The killer had claimed that after he shot Trayvon, he had spread his arms apart until the police arrived in fear that Trayvon might have a weapon. But the first pictures taken on the scene by police officers showed Trayvon's body lying face down, not with his hands outstretched, but underneath his body. Could someone say that that was inconsistent with the defendant's statement that his hands were straight out, that he had put his hands out, around the set? Ask. That positioning as seen there, yes it is, Sereno said. After De La Ronda arrested his redirect, O'Mara began questioning Sereno again, now more forcefully than ever. Regarding his client's use of the term assholes, O'Mara suggested to Detective Sereno that the killer could have been generalizing and not explicitly meaning Trayvon, because you know from your investigation that he was a bit frustrated that his neighborhood was being assailed by burglars, right? Sereno said yes. O'Mara mentioned his client's admission that he had been following Trayvon. But wait, during one of the killer's renditions, he said he was not following Trayvon, but was just walking in the same direction. Anything wrong with following somebody like that? He asked. And the rejection caused the question to be rephrased. Do you think there was anything wrong with him following him to see where he was going? Legally speaking, no, Sereno said. But if you are in fear of your life, why would you get out of your vehicle to follow someone? Another challenge that you made to Mr. Zimmerman concerned this question about his hands over the face. O'Mara continued after a series of other questions, and yet in that screaming on the 911 recording, there wasn't a great deal of muffling. Would you agree? No, sir, there was not yet, Sereno said. It may also be that you perceive getting smothered even when somebody has a hand on your broken nose. Possibly, yes, said Sereno. Again, this was not consistent with the evidence. There was none of Zimmerman's blood at all on Trayvon's hands. Would you agree that there may have been some screams muffled enough so they simply didn't show up on the tape? There could have been, possibly. After O'Mara returned to his defense table, De La Ronda cross-examined Sereno briefly before saying no further questions and Judge Nelson excused Chris Sereno from the witness stand. Watching the detective depart, I couldn't help but feel as though I was watching our great hope go up in smoke. We had suffered yet another major defeat in the case. The detective had all of the right answers, but he was never asked the right questions. 6 days later, Serena was called back to testify again. O'Mara asked Serena about playing the 911 call for me. For the first time, I had lost my son the day before, and through a cloud of unfathomable grief and confusion, I said I wasn't sure about about whose voice was screaming for help on the tape. That would be misinterpreted by the police and surely nailed by the defense as meaning that I felt it wasn't Trayvon but his killer yelling for help, which was 100% false. Why are we still speaking about Sereno asking questions? Did there come a time that you met with Tracy Martin and his girlfriend Brandy Green in your office? O'Mara asked, yes, sir, there is. There was, Sereno replied. O'Mara then asked detailed questions about our meeting, even down to how we were seated when Sereno played us the 911 calls. When asked if I thought it was Trayvon screaming on the record, on the recordings, the detective testified that I looked away and said no under my breath. It's hot as shit. Oh my god. On Wednesday, July 3rd, Trayvon City made an appearance in one of the most dramatic moments of the trial. During the testimony of Amy Stewart, a crime laboratory analyst in the firearms division of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, prosecutor John Guy brought out the actual hoodie Trayvon was wearing the night he was killed. The article of clothing that I had seen him wear so many times was now mounted behind glass in the frame with the arm stretched out and the hood pulled up. The bullet hole was clearly visible over the heart, surrounded by dry blood. By this time, hoodies had become a symbol of our movement for justice, but now it was an exhibit on the trial. In the trial, and the first time people in court and watching on television had seen the actual hoodie that Trayvon was wearing on the night of his death. Amy Stewart explained that she had examined the hoodie as part of the initial investigation and had also done distance testing to calculate the distance of the gun from Trayvon's chest when the fatal shot was fired. Prosecutor Guy lifted the frame hoodie in front of the jury so that Stewart could better illustrate the steps she took in the investigation. But I could see the courtroom reflected in the glass. Everyone's face, black, white, young, old, my face, and Sabrina's face, and our family member's face, all staring back from the reflection with the shape of the hoodie. It was a powerful moment. The hoodie had that had first made the killer suspicious of Trayvon, the hoodie that had sparked the chase in the fatal gunshot, the hoodie that would later be transformed into a symbol of our struggle for justice, was now front and center in the courtroom. Another visual representation of how powerful our movement for justice, not just for Trayvon, but for all the young men and women who would follow him in death from senseless violence, had become. We could all see ourselves in that hoodie, but what we saw was uncertain. Could the jury see the case from our eyes, from Trayvon's eyes, or did the jury see the case from the eyes of the killer and the defense? First guy and then O'Mara on redirect questioned the witness about the hole in the hoodie in detail, complete with close-ups of the bloody hoodie and bloodier sweatshirt underneath with the bullet hole just beneath the Nike logo. The witness talked about gunpowder, things called soothing, trigger pulls, and gun rates, all of the complicated science of ballistics. My mind real with the science and statistics. But what did it all prove? The clothing displayed recitals and physical effects consistent with the contact shot, she said, meaning the muzzle or the end of the barrel of the gun was against the sweatshirt when it was fired. Guy asked the witness correct. She said, all of which meant that my son was shot through the heart at point blank range. The same day the prosecution called Florida the Department of Law Enforcement DNA analyst Anthony Gargon. He testified that none of the killer DNA was found under Trayvon's fingernails, and none of the Trayvon DNA was found on the killer's gun, which we felt put to rest the notion that Trayvon grabbed the gun. July 4, 2013 fell on a Thursday, and the court recessed with the trial set to resume the next day, a Friday. We spent the 4th of July in our hotel in Lake Mary, and we didn't go anywhere to watch the fireworks. We couldn't go out in public like that. Still, the 4th of July was very significant for us. I was increasingly sure that the trial wasn't going our way, that our side of the story wasn't being fully told in court. But I also reflected on how far we come from those cold, lonely moments when I first found out about Trayvon's death. The story didn't die because we had a free press and some reporters who were willing to fight with us in public forums, even when officials wouldn't. Our pleas for justice went all the way to the White House, to the country's democratically, oh my God, democratically elected President Barack Obama. And even if the prosecution of our case felt insufficient, we were having our day in court. We were ordinary people, the most ordinary if. That didn't make sense. And on that Independence Day, we felt blessed to be living in a country where voices like ours could be heard and justice could be given a chance to prevail. But I knew that our country's history was more complicated than any 4th of July story would tell. In fact, as America 2013, and America that was turning that was tuning in every night to watch highlights from the trial and debates over our case was very different in some ways from the one in which I write this book in 2016, when a tragic series of other young black men have died from senseless violence, many by police bullies, and where cities like Ferguson, Missouri, had gone up in flames. Our son wasn't nearly the first young black person to be killed, but the larger movement around it marked the beginning of the new response to the violence. Whew. At that time, we saw Trayvon's case as an isolated event, a senseless killing calling out for justice. That was before the wave of killings, before we met parents like Ron Davis, whose 17-year-old African American son, Jordan Davis, was shot dead by a 45-year-old white software developer who fired 10 bullets at Davis and his friends in their SUV outside of Jacksonville convenience store, mainly because he felt they were playing their music too loud. It was before Ron Davis told us about what he called the injustice of the justice system, where white officials choose white jurors, where less than 10% of judges were African American, where defendants or their supporters pay for the best possible defense attorneys, leaving victims' families and prosecutors outmatched by defense attorneys using the soon to become familiar strategy of blaming the victim for their own death. He was no angel, these defense attorneys would say over the dead bodies of young black men. It was preserved. They don't want to hear, Ron Davis would tell us, of the court system. But what understanding, but that understanding would come later. There on that 4th of July, we believed our case stood alone, and we're hopeful that it would never happen to another parent's child. We also felt grateful to even be heard in the court in Florida and have a judge and jury consider our case. We already know how it's about to go. Even getting the case to trial was a major victory, and so we followed what Crump told us to do: handle ourselves with dignity and composure and let the anger pass when we felt it, even though at times I felt like I, it would consume me. But on that July 4th, 2013, we also felt gratitude as Americans with the right to a fair trial, even if we had to fight through the gloom of our own grief and waken the nation's conscience, our conscience to achieve that night. When we returned to court after the holiday, the prosecution called Sabrina to stand. Many would say that it was insensitive to force a grieving mother to testify, and later, in his closing argument, De La Ronda would defend his decision to call Sabrina, saying, Miss Fulton, people ask why you even question her. How dare you question the mom of a passing away 17-year-old, he said. Doctors cut people sometimes when they do their work. He would continue, that it was something I had to present to you about the way it happened and how it happened. And you know the impact and just how moms think about these killings, both sides, because I know that both moms believe in their heart with their soul that was their son's cry for help. You had to, you want to, and it's just the way you get through it. She walked into the courtroom that day in the dark suit, her jacket worn over her a beige blouse. Oh my god. She wore glasses and a pearl necklace with matching earrings. Her hair was up in her familiar bun, and while it had been many years since we had been husband and wife, we were forever in this fight together for the love of our kids. It was tough for me to watch her endure the agony of the trial. The courtroom was small, and the man who killed my son sat at the defense table, not far from the witness stand where Sabrina was now sitting. I could feel the tension in the room. I glanced over at the killer. Sabrina, staring back at him, Was steady and strong. The woman who was once so filled with grief that she couldn't get out of her bedroom had found her inner resolve to be a warrior when she needed to. She stared her name, and De La Rianda began his questioning. Are you married, ma'am? She asked. I'm divorced, Sabrina answered. Do you have any children? Yes, I do. Can you tell us who they are and their names? My youngest son is Trayvon Benjamin Martin. He's in heaven, she said. I looked over at the jury. I couldn't tell anything from their blank expressions. And my oldest son is Javaris Lamar Fulton, said Sabrina. After asking Sabrina to state the basic facts of her life, De La Ronda said, was Trayvon Martin right or left handed? Trayvon was right handed, she said. This was an important detail since the gun the killer claimed Trayvon was reaching for was holstered behind his right side, which would have required Trayvon to reach for it with his less dominant hand. Prior to your son's death, had you heard him crying or yelling? Oh. Yeah, of course, but De La Rianda was getting ready to once again play the tape of the 911 call with Trayvon's blood curdling when screams for help and the fatal gunshot. Sabrina remains static as she heard the last of her son's screams again. There was a brief silence in the courtroom after the tape. Then Ariana asked the next question. Ma'am, he said, breaking the silence, that screaming or yelling. Do you recognize that? Yes, she said. And who do you recognize that to be? Trayvon Benjamin Martin, she said without hesitation. The prosecutor, without asking a single question about Trayvon's background or character, had no further questions at the time. O'Mara stood up and attempted to apologize for her loss, but De La Ronda was quick with an objection, saying O'Mara's conduct was improper since he was not asking a question. The judge sustained the objection, and O'Mara began his cross-examination. Will you tell us the first time that you listened to that tape? O'Mara asked, "Where were you?" "I was here in Sanford," Sabrina said. "I believe it was in the mayor's office." That was pursuant to the request made by by your lawyer to have that tape released. Correct, it was. I imagine that it was probably one of the worst things that you went through to listen to the tape. Correct, O'Mara asked. Absolutely. And that if it was your son in fact screaming, as you testified, that would suggest that it was Mr. Zimmerman's fault that led to his death. Correct, she agreed. And if it was not your son screaming, O'Mara continued, if it was in fact George Zimmerman, then you would have to accept the probability that it was Trayvon Martin who caused his own death. Correct? I don't understand your question, Sabrina said, remaining composed. If you were to listen to that tape and not hear your son's voice, that would mean that it would have been George Zimmerman's voice, correct? And not hear my son screaming. Is that what you're asking? Sabrina said, yes, ma'am. I heard my son screaming. She said, definitively. I understand, O'Mara said. The only alternative, would you agree, would be that if it was not your son screaming, that it would be George Zimmerman, correct? The all-around objected due to speculation, and Judge Nelson again sustained. You certainly had to hope that it was your son screaming even before you heard it, correct? O'Mara said, I didn't hope for anything. She said, I just simply listened to the tape. And in your mind, as a mother, there is no doubt whatsoever it was him screaming, correct? Absolutely. He mentioned the other people who listened to the tape in the mayor's office. Every one of them then and told you that they agreed with your opinion. That was Trayvon Martin's voice, correct? They didn't tell me anything. O'Mara asked Sabrina if anyone had prepared Sabrina before the tape was played, telling her that you would soon be listening to screams from the event that led to your son's death. No one had told her anything about the tape before she heard it. She said, not the mayor, none of our attorneys or family members present. And how could they? They hadn't heard the tape yet either, and I had only heard portions of it. The question is whether or not anyone told you to prepare yourself for the event or the trauma of having to listen to somebody scream moments before your son was shot. The answer was still no. You just needed to listen to it one time, correct? That's it. O'Mara said he was finished with questions, subject to recalling Sabrina as a witness if, if needed, and De La Ronda had a few questions on redirect. You were asked by the defense counsel about hope. He said, were you still hoping that he would still be alive? Of course she was. I don't know how else to ask this, but I'm going to ask it. De La Ronda continued. Did you enjoy listening to that recording? Absolutely not. Sabrina said. Then Arianda was finished, but again O'Mara stood up from the defense table. At the risk of another objection, he said, I don't mean to put you through this any more than necessary than we need to, but you certainly will hope that your son Trayvon Martin did nothing that could have led to his own death. What was your question again? She asked. You certainly hope, as a mom, that certainly hope that your son Trayvon Martin would not have done anything that would have led to his own death. What I hope for, she said, is that this would have never happened and he would still be here. That's my hope. And now dealing with the reality that he is no longer here. It is certainly your hope as a mom. Hope. I'm gonna hold out hope as long as you can. That Trayvon Martin was in no way responsible for his own death, correct? I don't believe he was. She said. O'Mara Rest returning to the defense table. Sabrina's testimony was over in less than 30 minutes. The prosecution moved on, calling my son Gerard to stand next with John Guy leading the questioning. Gerard is now 22. Then 22 was is both an honor student and an extremely respectable young man. Oh my. He stood by us every inch of the way in taking his brother's death to the nation, taking time off from his studies at Florida International University. From the moment we found out that Trayvon had been killed, Gerard had never enjoyed being in the public eye. He had to first endure the positions and now testify at the trial of his brother's killer. But he did it all without hesitation. We went out to dinner one night, Sabrina, Gerard, our attorneys, and me. We had tried to keep the gory details of his brother's shooting away from Gerard's. But on this night, we got into a conversation about where the bullet went through Trayvon's body, and Gerard's asked us to explain. Trayvon was shot through the heart. I said, I didn't realize Gerard didn't already know. Gerard's body suddenly seemed to give out from under him. We had to pick him up and take him outside. Gerard was clearly holding a lot of pain inside him and rarely let it slip out. Gerard is a strong young man of implacable values, intelligence, and courage. And from that moment he entered the courtroom in his dark suit, white shirt, and red 5,000 role model tie with the design of a large black cans, such in smaller black cans. I knew he would conduct himself as he always has, with intelligence, poise, and complete control. That's my brother, he said early on in his testimony. Trayvon adding, after a series of questions about their age difference and other things. We were very close. Under questioning by prosecutor Guy, Gerard said that even though he was 4.5 years older than Trayvon, they still did all the things like that brothers do together. Since your brother death, Guy asked, have you had any opportunity to hear a tape that contained screaming and the gunshot? Yes, he said, anywhere between 10 and 15 times. And how have you heard it? Have you heard it on a computer, on a TV, on the internet, or what? He had heard the tapes first on the computer the day in the mayor's office and later on television. Did you did you realize? Did you recognize any voices on that tape? Guy asked. Yes, Gerard said. My brother. What parts do you recognize as your brother's voice? The yelling and the screaming. Gerard said he had heard Trayvon yell a number of times before, but never like that. Guy finished his question again quickly, and O'Mara began to cross-examine again in detail. Guy finished his. Uh, uh, O'Mara said that Gerard wasn't as certain that the screams were Trayvon when he spoke to a reporter on CBS Miami about the tapes, and the defense attorney quoted what Gerard had said at the time. You said honestly, really haven't listened to it. I heard it. I would think it was my brother, but I'm not completely positive. Correct? Omari's Gerard's agreed and confirmed O'Mara's questions about listening to the tape with the family in the mayor's office. From having listened to O'Mara continue, it was your thought that it might be Trayvon, correct? When we heard in the mayor's office, I guess I didn't want to believe that it was him, Gerard said, pausing. So that's why during that interview I said I wasn't sure. Listening to it was clouded by shock and denial and sadness. I didn't really want to believe that it was him. The same day, July 5th, brought the prosecution's last witness, the medical examiner, Shipping Bow, who performed Trayvon's autopsy. His heart was beating until there was no blood left, said the medical examiner, examining that Trayvon could have remained alive for between 1 to 10 minutes after the shooting. It chilled me to know that his last minutes of life were spent alone with his killer. When the screen before the jury displayed a picture of Trayvon's body as it arrived at the medical examiner's office, Sabrina left the courtroom. At the end of the medical examiner's testimony, after 9 days and 38 witnesses, the prosecution rested, allowing the defense to begin presenting its case. I was the 11th witness for the defense. I was disappointed that the prosecution hadn't called me so a jury could hear and hopefully feel a heartbreak of a father of the victim, and that I was instead being called by the defense. The defense attorneys were bulldogs, and they did their job making the jury see the side of the killer they wanted them to see. The prosecution's job was to show that this was a child who had been killed, a kid who was walking in pace from the 7-Eleven and was pursued by a stranger. Lord have mercy. I don't know why this chapter is so long. The defense called character witnesses for the person who killed our son, but other than Sabrina Gerard's, the prosecution did not. Why? They could have called more character witnesses for Trayvon, parents, grandparents, teachers, counselors, friends, all of whom would have shown that he was a person, not a caricature. But they called none. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why they didn't call more people who knew Trayvon best to show who he really was. Now, with the trial nearing an end, I had begun pressing the prosecutors every day of their strategy. Why didn't you call a certain witness? Why didn't you follow a certain line of questions? Didn't you see that opportunity? They tried to assure me that they were listening but had it under control. I still had questions. For instance, they called Sabrina Gerard to testify, but they didn't call me. I was the last parent to see him alive. I was the first parent to know he died. Why didn't the state call me? Although I didn't understand why the state didn't call me, I did know why the defense did. They were try to get me to admit that I had originally said that it wasn't Trayvon's voice screaming for help on the 911 tape, which I had endlessly said in interviews and depositions was not what I had said. The New York Times called me the defense key witness in their attempt to convince the jury that it was the killer, not my son screaming for help on the 911 tape. That morning, I prepared myself for what I knew would be a battle ahead. Dressed in a dark blue suit and matching tie, I was ready to tell my story, eager to clarify what I knew to be true. I was ready to defend my son, who, as a victim, shouldn't have needed defending. But here we are. You've been here to testify, for testimony throughout the trial, correct? Mark O'Mara began, including today when we had a couple officers testify about the event where you had gone to meet the investigator Chris Sereno at the Sanford Police Department. Do you remember that meeting? Yes, I said. Both Brandy and I went with Sereno less than 2 days after Trayvon's death to make sure he had verified that Trayvon had been identified. My understanding on Mara continued was that you listened to a number of tapes, one of which was the tape that we're identifying as the Lord 911 call, correct? Yes, I said. I understand that it was difficult to listen to. It included the shot and ended your son's life, O'Mara said. At the end of that tape, do you recall Officer Sereno asking you whether or not you can identify your son's voice? Not those exact words I said, but something to that nature, yes. What had actually happened and what I said on the witness stand was that after Sereno had played the tape, he asked me, do you recognize the voice? I remember the day vividly, even in all my disorientation and devastation. hmm It's kind of like, it's crazy because it's like, I haven't been in any situation like this where anyone was killed or anything like that, but just reading this and seeing how crazy shit can go, I hate bringing this up. I mean, it's something I think about because it happened and it was like in a so unexpected way, and a lot was going down at the time. But reading like shit like this, when the detectives be questioning people and shit like that, it make me think of years ago when, in some way, I had to be questioned. And the crazy thing about it is, no one was even going to tell me. I found out through my cousin. That's how I found out I had to go to Delaware to be questioned. That's the God honest truth. I don't think anybody else is going to tell me. I just been in Philly doing my own thing, and I think, yep, she was the one who told me. She reached out to me and through I think Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and she the one who told me that they probably would be questioning me. And then I went to Delaware, and I knew some fuck shit was up because my cousin's husband at the time, well, her baby father, his mom kept on rushing. The detective said he'd reach out to me when he had time, but for some reason, she just kept rushing me to go to the detective office. And I didn't question, but in my mind, I felt like something was up because at the end of the day, I ain't got shit to do with it. I know I ain't do anything wrong. I'm just there helping y'all out watch the kids when y'all need help watching the kids. And the only thing is, okay, I'm her blood cousin. Other than that, now that I've really took the time to really think, it's a lot of fuck shit that happened. But at the end of the day, no matter how much fuck shit happened, I didn't want to think that it would go that far as it did. Because I'm sitting there like at the end of the day, I don't think nobody would try to do me dirty or put me in a situation that could jeopardize me. But I don't I was just thinking a bunch of thoughts that it was clear as day you can't trust these fucking people. And the only thing I can think of now is that out in a way I wish I never did go out there, but then again, come to think about it, I'm like, in a way, again, I'm a little happy that I was out there because I feel like shit could have been worse. Right now, I think about it, I think if I wasn't there, shit could have been way worse. But the only thing would have been, I really wouldn't have nothing to do with it if I never did respond to when the mom reached out to me on Instagram asking me, can I come down there and help with the kids? Because she knew about all the arguing me and her son did. She knew about arguing. She knew about the what happened with me and my cousin, and they took advantage of the situation with me and my cousin. Matter of fact, let me finish reading this, and then I'm gonna talk about I'm gonna talk very little about shit. Yes, I said both Brandon. Okay, they just turn on to make sure. Okay, my understanding, O'Mara said that you listened to them. Okay, yes, I understand that it was difficult to listen to any of your son's wife and say you recall ask you whether or not your son's voice, not those exact words I said, but something to that nature. Yes, what had actually happened. And what I said on the witness stand was that after Sereno had played the tapes, he asked me, do you recognize the voice? I remember that day vividly, even in all my disorientation and devastation. And when Sereno played the tape for me that morning without giving me any content as to what I would hear, and the sound of the gunshot came echoing through this room, the last thing on my mind was to analyze it. I didn't tell him no, that wasn't Trayvon. I said I think the chair had wheels, and I kind of pushed away from the table and kind of shook my head and said, I can't tell. So your words were, I can't tell, something to that effect. But I never said no, that wasn't my son's voice. like Gerard's had testified, shook in denial and suffering, had clouded my thoughts, and I desperately went on it to believe that this was all mistaken. Trayvon was still alive. You heard also Sereno testify that you said no, correct, O'Mara said. And you heard also Singleton also testify that that she was about 8 or 10 feet away, and she heard you say no, or an indication that you acknowledged that was not Trayvon's voice. Is that correct? I had no idea that she, Officer Singleton, was even in the vacancy. I said the first I had heard Officer Singleton was within earshot of my meeting with Sereno, was in her testimony in court, and she said about hearing the tape, I was choked up myself. Did you ever ask to hear the tape a second time? No, not at the moment, no. Did you ever tell anybody that you had listened to a clean-up version of the tape and were then able to identify the voice on it? What do you mean clean-up version? I'm asking you, sir. To my knowledge, the tape I had listened to was the same tape that circulated. I said, that's the only tape I know about. Did you ever tell Serena Ford, your ex-wife, that you had listened to a tape as also Serena's death? There was a lot of stuff going on. I said, we had just buried our son. A lot of emotions, and you just don't think of every little detail that you've been through. Honestly, it was a tragic and still is a tragic time for us. And so, just to answer your question, did I tell Miss Ford and I listened to the tape? No, I didn't. The tapes were begged to be released. The tapes that gutted us to listen to, the tapes that we were sure would make the truth clear to everyone. And now the trial was turning out to be about the tape, but in a way I never would have predicted. The tape of my son dying after what I knew could only be his own high-pitched screams for help, followed by a failed gunshot. Why would a man with a gun be the one screaming for help? The tape was the evidence the defense tried so hard to use to prove that Trayvon's last moments on Earth were spent in the tech instead of trying to ward off his attacker. But I wasn't budging on what I knew to be true. It was Trayvon's voice. By now, the 911 tape had become a he said, she said kind of thing. We knew it was Trayvon's voice, while the killer camp said it was the defendant's voice. Even the voice experts who were called in by both the media and the lawyers on both sides couldn't verify the voice 100%, which only fed the debate. I felt that Detective Sereno's interview after the shooting said it all. Hear that voice in the background. That's you, he adds. And the killer replied, that doesn't even sound like me. After listening to the tape maybe 20 times, I testified about the day in the mayor's office when we were allowed to listen to it as many times as we wanted. I said I knew that it was Trayvon's voice. I didn't direct that toward any family members. Matter of fact, I think the family members had started leaving out of the room and was too much for them. They couldn't take it, and I just decided to sit there and listen to it. De La Ronda soon began his cross-examination. Mr. Martin De La Ronda began. Even at the time, is it hard for you to believe your son is no longer living? It's very difficult to believe that Trayvon is not living. As I said over and over, that was my best friend in life, and to have him going is tragic. Now, in terms of being sure we understand the context, he said, your son was killed late evening Sunday, February 26th, and you would have gone over to the Sanford Police Department the morning. And I believe it was the 28th. Do you recall that? I answered yes. And I believe you also, you only found out your son was dead at some point, actually the 27th. And true that Monday, correct, yes. Was it? It's still hard for you to believe your son was dead. It's still hard to this day that he did. I said, do you not around try to describe this event, asking if officers had come to the townhouse and showed me a picture of the body there on the ground. Before I could answer, O'Mara objected, and the attorney approached the bench. I was asking you about the 27th. Dylan Ronda said when the trial was on, investigator Sereno had come and shown you a photograph. Is that correct? And you identified it as being your son, correct? I said, Dylan Ronda moved on the next day, Tuesday, listening to various 911 calls and their contents, asking if I had heard all of the tapes. One day I went to the Sanford Police Department. I don't think Detective Sereno played each call in its entirety. I said he played some of each call leading up to the last call with the failed shot. Am I safe to assume that you were still at that time were in denial of the sense of not wanting to believe that your son dead? Then I around to ask correct. This was an emotional time for you. Would that be fair to say? Very emotional. Then I around to restated what happened after I heard for the first time the gunshot that killed my son. You pulled your chair back in disbelief. He said, you realize that was the shot that killed my son? Yes, I said. Do you really know what to do at this point? And did you really know what to do at this point? From that point until today, my world has just been turned upside down. Then after you heard the cries for help and then also the shot, then I ran on the ass right there. Investigator Sereno asked you about the recording. If you could recognize the voice correct, I answered correct. And I'm assuming that was difficult for you to even contemplate identifying or not identifying the voice. Is that correct? I tried to answer Sereno as best as I could. I said there is a lot of commotion in the at recording. Wasn't there? Then Ariana said the yells for help, the person calling, and then most importantly the shot too. In terms of your mind, what was going through your mind? Can you describe for the jury what was going through your mind? Basically, I said I was listening to my son's last cry for help. I was listening to his entire life being taken. And I was trying to come to grips that Trayvon was here no more. It was just tough. Eli Rianda asked if during our meeting in the mayor's office we were play all of the 911 tapes or just the Jenna Laura tape that record the gunshot in the background. I told him I couldn't remember if it was all the tapes or just one, but I did call taking control of the mayor's computer and replaying Trayvon screams over and over and over again. Why did I run to ask, were you trying to deal with this? Why were you doing that? It wasn't as much as I was trying to deal with it. I said I was just trying to figure out the night of February 26, 2012. Why would the defendant get out of his vehicle and chase my son? There was a chance for the state to bounce back and get back to the story of the night, but they didn't. And just like that, I was done. No further questions were asked of me by the prosecution, and I felt another opportunity slipped away. I'll be back because this is a lot to read, and I'm getting tired of reading. So I'll get back probably later.